Hello and welcome back to Simon's Rants. I'm Simon, and today I'm going to give my on-second thought on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. Before I get started though, this is your spoiler warning, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything spoiled, you can click away now, go watch it, come back, and we'll talk about it then. So Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban is the third Harry Potter movie. It came out in 2004 and was directed by Alfonso Cuarón. It also introduces Gary Oldman, Timothy Spall, and David Thewlis, and has the returning cast as well of Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, Rupert Grint, Alan Rickman, and so on. As I just mentioned, Alfonso Cuarón directed this one, so it's the first one therefore that Chris Columbus did not direct, and because of that, there's a lot of artistic differences. One of the biggest ones being Professor Flitwick, who for some reason went from looking like this to this. And that's questionable enough, but there are a lot of changes in this wizarding world that we have. Some are good, some are bad, but I would say the overwhelming majority are good. Chris Columbus, as I had mentioned in the previous ones, had a very squeaky clean, safe feel to his movies that were a little bit boring, honestly. This one felt much more edgy, it felt much more teen, it felt more angsty, and there were so many different dark edges to it that were so much more interesting and unique. And on top of that, it's got an indie foreign film kind of feel to it that doesn't feel at all like the other ones did. And in fact, it doesn't feel like any of the ones that came out after it did, and that's a shame to me because I love how this movie feels and looks. This is also the film where Michael Gambon replaces Richard Harris as Dumbledore, which was sad because of the fact that he passed away, but it was good for the franchise in my honest opinion because he was a much more accurate representation of who Dumbledore is. As I had mentioned previously, he was much too stoic and too perfect in the first two films. In this one, you see him as a little bit more laid back, a little more imperfect, and with a bit more of a sense of humor. I think the scene that officially sold me on the new actor portraying Dumbledore was when Hermione and Harry run into him after switching everything by going back in time. And they say, "We did it, Dumbledore, we did it." And he goes, "Did what?" "Good night," and just walks away. And that was such a perfect portrayal of how Dumbledore would act in that way. Up until this point, he seemed like he was this stoic, perfect kind of character, but maybe a bit oblivious, maybe a bit biased. I think in this moment, you realize during this portrayal of this actor's version of the character that he is not oblivious by accident. He's purposely being oblivious, or he's choosing to pretend to ignore certain things because he knows he wants things to go a specific way, so he's allowing it to go that way because of his ulterior motives. And I think that was portrayed so perfectly by this actor who gave it so much more depth and so much more realism and so much more accuracy to the actual character. I think a lot of the characters in this movie had a lot more depth than they previously had as well, including Harry, Hermione, and Ron. I think some of the characters did suffer from their portrayal in this movie, however, including Draco, who was a snide bully character who was arrogant and superior acting, and in this movie he turns into kind of a whiny brat, which thankfully doesn't carry over into the other movies, and I think it was just the vision of Alfonso Cuarón, and it was inaccurate. So some things were fixed, some things were ruined. And that can be said for the entirety of this film. A lot of things were fixed, a lot of things were unfortunately ruined. Like I mentioned in the last one, the Expelliarmus charm had been introduced. In this one, it was completely changed. In the second one, the Expelliarmus charm was supposed to knock the wand out of your opponent's hand. In this one, it knocks Snape backwards like 10 feet into a bed and he gets knocked unconscious. That's not how that spell was supposed to work. I do love this movie, I really do. I think it's the best Harry Potter film, but it did introduce some inconsistencies that would then plague this film franchise for the remainder of its runtime. And it also does have some writing flaws here or there where characters just act specific ways because it's relevant to the plot, it's convenient. Like Snape confronting Harry, Ron, and Hermione after he catches them, completely oblivious to the obvious werewolf right there. They come out from the hole beneath the tree, run out into the middle of the field where then Lupin turns into the werewolf. He's doing his whole howling thing, he's right there, and then Snape runs out and grabs them, completely oblivious to the werewolf directly behind him. There's no way he could have gotten that distance from the tree to Ron, Harry, and Hermione without noticing the giant werewolf there. But because it's a movie, he did, and then he gets yeeted to the side, and that entire thing was pointless, and there's stuff like that in this movie that's kind of frustrating. This film isn't perfect, but it definitely is entertaining. Another thing that's always bothered me about this is the portrayal of Sirius Black. Now, don't get me wrong, Gary Oldman is a phenomenal actor, and I do not blame him at all for this. It has to come down to either writing or directing, something along those lines. Sirius Black in this movie is completely deranged and crazy up until the moment that you know he's actually the good guy. And then there's a sudden switch in how he's portrayed in this film. Like, literally, you see him in the room acting like a deranged maniac until Lupin goes, oh, by the way, he's not a bad guy, this rat thing is. And then Gary Oldman's just, oh yes, I knew your father well. And it's like, where did that come from? That's always bothered me. Like, 1 second he's laughing like a maniac, and the next second he's like, yep, you look just like your dad, except for your eyes. They look like your mom's. By the way, do you want to be my godson? It's like, it just doesn't work. It's clunky and awkward and weird. Now, I know I just said a bunch of bad things about this movie, but honestly, those are the only bad things I can say about this movie. It comes down to a couple of redesign flaws, it comes to a couple inconsistencies, and then a couple clunky moments in the writing and directing. Other than that, this movie is so entertaining. I love the new feel, I love the new aura around this franchise that this movie introduced. It made it feel cool, it made it feel creepy, it made it feel angsty, and it made it feel relatable to a teenager, which was exactly the point. The early films were supposed to be magical and wide-eyed like you would be as a kid. This film, and moving forward, was much more designed for a teen who was angsty and who felt rebellious. As a kid watching this, I felt almost like I shouldn't be allowed to watch it. Like, oh, this is cool, this is dark, this is creepy, and it was amazing and I loved it. Looking back, it was perfectly innocent in every way, but it perfectly captured the way that a teenager would feel, at least a young teen, wanting to rebel and having some sort of outlet for that. Also, another thing that I love about this movie is I'd mentioned kind of briefly earlier that there is a time travel thing involved here, and it just so happens to be one of my, if not my favorite, time travel representations in a film. You can't really talk about time travel in movies or in life in general because it always brings up loopholes or paradoxes in some way. It's just too complicated to talk about or comprehend. Like, I love Back to the Future as much as anybody else, but those movies don't make any sense. They're fun, they're great, but they don't make any sense. I feel like Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban actually portrayed time travel really well in a way that actually kind of makes sense. There's still some sort of paradox to it, but it's really well represented. Instead of forcing changes by time traveling, they become the changes that were already occurring there. And I know that doesn't really make sense, but it's magic which helps explain it, and it's just a cool idea that I really like. And I know J.K. Rowling is the furthest thing from originality, and I know she didn't come up with this, but honestly, to her credit, she wrote it in well, which I do not credit her or compliment her much about anything because, for the most part, she's a hack. But that's beside the point. But honestly, I can't really say enough good things about this movie. I love it. I love the darkness, the creepy factor, the introduction of the Dementors, the change in the theme, that main theme of Harry Potter. They made it a little bit creepier and more cool sounding. Everything about this movie, for the most part, took a slight upgrade, and it was just so good because of it. There's a couple of nitpicks here or there, and I did point them out, and they are valid, but for the most part, this movie took this franchise to the best it could possibly be. I honestly wish Alfonso Cuarón had stayed to direct the rest of the movies, but I understand why he didn't. That's a big commitment to take on, so it's fine, but oh well. And on top of everything else I've already said about it, the acting is great, the kids all got better, the actors you introduced are good. Great even actors. The story is unique from the first two, which were kind of copycats of each other. This one was more original and different. Like I already said, the imagery was darker and better and cooler looking. Everything about this movie is just so enjoyable. I just love it. I can't say it's perfect, but I can say that it is really good. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share, and if you're new here, subscribe. Also, let me know about what movies you want me to review after I'm done with the Harry Potter franchise. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.